Alexa, stop. Alexa, play Beethoven.
Shuffling songs by Ludwig van Beethoven.
So whatever you want to come in. Alexa, stop.
Namaste. This is the second workshop dealing with Self-One. Now, the format will be a slight review of the first workshop for a few minutes. Then we'll get into the specifics of the description of Self-Two will be the next one. We will start with Self-One today, and then we will go through to the end of that. And then the next one will be on Self-Two. Getting the selves mixed up, kind of like we do in real life and like I've done with my life. All right, in essence, in the first workshop, we gave an introduction to the paradigm. And that paradigm, to repeat, is preceded by our consciousness of moving toward our connection with the God consciousness that includes the whole of creation as manifest by various universal laws. So it's vital for you to include yourself in everything that we talk about, knowing that my approach is only one way of measuring your self-development toward where you want to go with your life, and the realities stretching our consciousness and mind as far as we can make sense out of it. So it's important to know that the whole process of Self-One is designed to nurture. And that goes for the individual baby, that goes for the plants that we plant, for flowers and for fruit and for vegetables. And it goes for an idea. It also precedes the process of creation in transforming energy up the chakras. So, as we move into this level of understanding, we have divided the Self-One process into A and B. A being when the sperm contacts the egg and creates the zygote, which starts the beginning in the womb with the attachment to the womb, and 9 months intrauterine development. Now, once the baby develops according to the DNA schedule and process, After 9 months, it is ready to be born at the human level. There are various other periods of time for other animals. But at the human level, roughly 9 months is the period that it takes to be fully developed, to be born. So at the beginning of the first breath, the baby moves to the B level of the self-one. And that's where it becomes more sensitive to the expanded environment that it is exposed to. And the space externally becomes important, and pretty much like it was in the womb, except there's more space. So, as the baby develops externally for roughly the next, let's say 7 to 10 years, the baby needs to have a continual, supportive, loving space as manifest through loving people and creative, loving experiences that bombard the senses. So it's important to have the availability of music, beautiful scenes, fresh air, and what's needed for the nurturing and the continued growth of the individual. Now that begins to challenge the way most modern civilizations reared their children during this self-be one stage. And that is, immediately the baby is faced with too many, overwhelming force to start its conformity. And that conformity is rooted in shame, control, and toilet training. So in most societies, the only exception I know is the Dalai Lama's society that follows the policies of Tantra Buddhism, which we will talk more about in Self 2 and 3. But the roots of Tantra Buddhism are that they take the child, let's say the leader of their particular group, who is a reincarnation of previous Dalai Lamas. The present Dalai Lama is number 14, but he's supposed to be connected spiritually right back to the first Dalai Lama. So he's got that kind of genetic history upon which the present approach to power and transformation of the Buddhist and Tantra ideals are integrated into the practicality of rearing him, and also in the approach to develop of the ashrams and communities built on Tantra Buddhist principles, which are these. The most helpless leader, let's say Dalai Lama 14, is looked upon very much as a special incarnation going back in a connected way to the Dalai Lama 1, and focusing on compassion, empathy, and mindfulness. So it's important to see how the very beginning of life, at the levels of AB through B, to the individual identity of the person. So as a child develops, say roughly the first decade, it is sensitive to issues of control, issues of choice, issues that relate to compassionate love, issues that relate to empathetic interaction with the important persons in their life, which may or may not be the biological family. But one of the points that it is essential to note, it doesn't matter in that system. That is, that the adults are expected to love and participate in the loving environment and growth nurturing environment that the individual child receives. So most of self-one, as touched on earlier, is related to a universal principle of nurturance, which is tied directly into mothering and parenting. And it's here that the child often gets attached to the person and not the space. So that the child associates all the goodies and good things that it gets with the mother and the family. And it becomes attached to those things and attached to people. Now, to continue the growth process, it's imperative to note that in most Western families and Eastern families, except for, so far as I know, the Tantra Buddhist system and those communities built on Buddhist tradition, which are really related to most of the guru systems, most of them are associated with attachment to people. Now that attachment, through the dynamics of the way the mind develops, becomes the energy that we reinvest into other people as we continue our maturation process, of which Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung contributed the insights of transference and how mythology and history play a part in the shaping of our belief systems and how they affect the boundaries of the self in our continued evolution. So roughly self-one is totally committed to the nurturing of the individual child. It's interesting that as self-two continues this growth process, we become more and more conscious of how the community, the collective, and the social influences of a given civilization affect the identity and the self-concept of the person. So that as we move into self-2 territory, before we move into self-2, I want to reiterate that self-1 is rooted in the chakra 1, which is rooted in aggression and the roots of power. Self-2, Self-1 is rooted in the self-1, self-2, and the beginning of self-3. And that includes the first chakra of aggression, which often can turn into violence, and the part 2, the step 2, which is connected to our movement up the scale to the sexual roots of the biological self, of body, spirit, and mind, of which modern psychology has been investigating and researching since the breakthrough from psychology, from philosophy primarily, to the understanding of the self as demonstrated in the work of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Now, as we move from self-1 to self-2, we become more and more sensitive to the input from our space, so that there is a quantum leap in the absorption into the inner space of the experiences from outer space in the hopes of civilizing our animal instincts. And it has served to much chagrin to reach only a certain level, but not being able to do that completely. So as we move into self-2 and we start to